The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Spin. The war wasn't all terror and violence. Sometimes things could almost get sweet. For instance, I remember a little boy with a plastic leg. I remember how we hopped over to Azar and asked for a chocolate bar. GI number 1, the kid said, and Azar laughed and handed over the chocolate. When the boy hopped away, Azar clucked his tongue and said, "Where's a bitch?" He shook his head sadly. One leg, for Christ's sake. Some poor fucker ran out of ammo. I remember Mitchell Sanders sitting quietly in the shade of an old banyan tree. He was using a thumbnail to pry off the body lice, working slowly, carefully depositing the lice in a blue USO envelope. His eyes were tired. It had been a long 2 weeks in the bush. After an hour or so, he sealed up the envelope, wrote "free" in the upper right corner, and addressed it to his draft board in Ohio. On occasions, the war was like a ping-pong ball. You could put fancy spin on it. You could make it dance. I remember Norman Bowker and Henry Dobbins playing checkers every evening before dark. It was a ritual for them. They would dig a foxhole and get the board out and play long, silent games as the sky went from pink to purple. The rest of us would sometimes stop by to watch. There was something restful about it, something orderly and reassuring. There were red checkers and black checkers. The playing field was laid out in a strict grid, and no tunnels or mountains or jungles. You know where you stood. You knew the score. The pieces were on the board. The enemy was visible. You could watch the tactics unfolding into larger strategies. There was a winner and a loser. There were rulers. I'm 43 years old and a writer now, and the war has been over for a long while. Much of it's hard to remember. I sit at this typewriter and stare through my words and watch Kiowa sinking into the deep muck of a shit field, or Kurt Lemon hanging in pieces from a tree, and as I write about these things, the remembering is turned into a kind of rehappening. Kiowa yells at me. Kurt Lemon steps from the shade into a bright sunlight, his brown face and shining, and then he soars into a tree. The bad stuff never stops happening. It lives in its own dimension, replaying itself over and over. But the war wasn't all that way. Like when Ted Lavender went too heavy on the tranquilizers. "How was the war today?" somebody would say, and Ted Lavender would give a soft, spacey smile and say, "Mellow, man, we got ourselves a nice mellow war today." And like the time we enlisted an old Papa San to guide us through the minefields out on Batsinigan Peninsula. The old guy walked with a limp, slow, and stooped over, but he knew where the safe spots were and where you had to be careful and where, even if you were careful, you could end up like popcorn. He had a tightrope walker's feel for the land beneath him, its surface tension, the give and take of things. Each morning we'd form up in a long column, the old Papa San out front, and for the whole day we'd troop along after him, tracing his footsteps, playing an exact and ruthless game of follow the leader. Rat Kiley made up a rhyme that caught on, and we'd all be chanting it together. Step out of line, hit a mine, follow the dink, you're in the pink. All around us the people were littered with bouncing betties and toe poppers and booby traps, artillery rounds. But in those 5 days on the Batanigan Peninsula, nobody got hurt. We all learned to love the old man. It was a sad scene when the choppers came to take us away. Jimmy Cross gave the old Papa San a hug. Mitchell Saunders and Lee Strunk loaded him up with boxes of sea rations. There were actually tears in the old guy's eyes. "Follow Dink," he said to each of us. "You go pink." If you weren't humping, you were waiting. I remember the monotony. Digging foxholes, slapping mosquitoes, the sun and the heat and the endless patties. Even in the deep bush, where you could die any number of ways, the war was nakedly and aggressively boring. But it was a strange boredom. It was a boredom with a twist. The kind of boredom that caused stomach disorders. You'd be sitting at the top of a high hill, the flat patties stretching out below, and the day would be calm and hot and utterly vacant, and you'd feel the boredom dripping inside you like a leaky faucet. Except it wasn't water. It was a sort of acid, and with each little droplet you feel the stuff eating away at important organs. You'd try to relax, you'd uncurl your fists and let your thoughts go. Well, you think this isn't so bad, and right then you'd hear gunfire behind you and your nuts would fly up into your throat and you'd be squealing pig squeals, that kind of boredom. I feel guilty sometimes. 43 years old and I'm still writing war stories. My daughter Kathleen tells me it's an obsession that I should write about a little girl who finds $1 million and spends it all on a Shetland pony. In a way, I guess she's right. I should forget it. But the thing about remembering is that you don't forget. You take your material where you find it, which is in your life at the intersection of past and present. The memory traffic feeds into a rotary up on your head where it goes in circles for a while. Then pretty soon imagination flows in, and the traffic merges and shoots off down 1,000 different streets. As a writer, all you can do is pick a street and go for the ride, putting things down as they come at you. That's the real obsession, all these stories. Not bloody stories necessarily, happy stories too, and even a few peace stories. Here's a quick peace story. A guy goes AWOL, shacks up in Denag with a Red Cross nurse. It's a great time. The nurse loves him to death. The guy gets whatever he wants whenever he wants it. The war's over, he thinks, just nookie and new angles. But then one day he rejoins his unit in the bush. Can't wait to get back into action. Finally, one of his buddies asks what happened with the nurse. Why so hot for combat? And the guy says, all that peace, man, it felt so good it hurt. I want to hurt it back. I remember Mitchell Sanders smiling as he told me the story. Most of it he made up, I'm sure, but even so it gave me a quick truth goose, because it's all relative.